Greetings petrolheads, welcome back to Automation the Car Company Tycoon Game. Today we're gonna look at two more cars for the community challenge. First up, the SGN Model 18 by Slacks, and then the base model in 1995 by Musty Man Guy. So the base model apparently seems to be the LT6 Marauder AWD, which is of course standing for all-wheel drive. Okay, so we are gonna have all-wheel drive in this thing. So much is pretty sure, unless he would lie with the title he gave it. So it has 4 seats. It's a coupe with a steel monocoque and aluminum panels, all-wheel drive, 5-speed gearbox, 161 horsepower is not too shabby. A 2-liter inline 4 powering this one, and 16 valves. Of course, if it's gonna be a 4-cylinder, it better be 16 valves, because otherwise, why would you really put a 4-cylinder engine into a car like this that isn't a 16 valve or a 20 valve for that matter? And we got multi-point EFI on this one as well. The wishbones are around, and a pretty light car despite the all-wheel drive system. So yeah, let's take a look at the engine first. We have dual overhead cams, no VVL, cast iron crank, which seems to be fine at 7,000 RPM still. These pistons are sort of approaching their limit. And the conrods are of course fine. They're I-beam steel, they better be fine. So moderately aggressive cam profile gives us a pretty late peak torque at 4,500 RPM. And we have a single configuration with a performance intake from the factory apparently. Interesting on that one. 55 ignition timing is not too aggressive. It's alright, it's pretty much where you'd expect a normal engine to be. Tubular headers is also fine. We get 2 straight-through mufflers, plus 2 quality on the exhaust system. Let's see, do we have any quality anywhere else? Yeah, on the bottom end. And no quality on the fuel system. Five-speed box. 6 speeds are available in 1995 already, but for a pretty affordable car like this, 6 speeds are a little over the top, I would say. We get the top speed is good, 240. We get a viscous LSD, and actually more power is going to the front than to the rear, which is interesting. I don't know many cars that have a front-biased all-wheel drive power distribution, but there are some. Plus 2 quality into the drivetrain tab. Then we have medium compound tires. Pretty wide tires considering we only have 161 horsepower, 225 front, 245 rear. They're gonna make for a lot of grip, but replacing them is a little bit expensive for a 17, 18-year-old. I know this myself. I've had a BMW that had like 225s, and they are not the cheapest compared to something of a regular size like 195s or so. Vented discs all around, 2 pistons up front and 1 on the rear. No brake fade, which is good. No under tray. Just like was stated in the rules anyway. 4 seats, standard interior and entertainment, as well as standard safety. We got +1 quality on all of these, and we got traction control. Traction control in 1995 is pretty top percent, or how do I say this? It's pretty much the gold standard. It's not too common yet in 1995. But some cars had it, and it's definitely at that point in time it's an argument to buy a car or a strong argument not to buy a car, because there were in the early stages of traction control in cars, some people were like, "Oh, we've been driving 30 years without traction control. Why would we need it now?" But there's also a bunch of people. There were also people, of course, who were like, "Oh, finally there's a sort of system for a car that prevents it from losing traction." You know, it's there were two sides to the argument. This body apparently has a really high ride height. I remember that actually from the Mark I Conqueror on the ESE campaign. I remember this body having a pretty high ride height. So overall, with the 10% markup, we're at pretty much 14 grand, and with the tuning, I think the bonnet hump is new, and these vents are new, and then also the rear has changed a little bit. Overall, it's still basically the same aesthetically though, and that's good. So you can still recognize the car. This time the saving worked properly on all the interior equipment. We have a turbocharger on this one now, and that's interesting because I think this is the only entry that had a naturally aspirated engine as stock and then got turbocharged. I might be wrong, but I think that's the only one. Also, pretty aggressive on the increased RPM limit, 800 RPM, and 75 cam profile, but very low boost actually, 0.41 bars. But you know, if there's any setup that can take, wait a minute, 49 spacing, was that also what we had as standard? It was. So perhaps I'm just gonna tone this down so we're back at 240, 241 I guess. We got wider tires, and we got 18-inch rims. We got vented discs still, of course, and I think they are still the same diameter as well. Same interior, of course. This is also all pretty much the same here. Only, of course, that we now have active sway bars, which we didn't have before. And let's look at the quarter-mile time now. Okay, so 16.2 seconds as opposed to 16.8. So there is certainly a noticeable improvement in acceleration. Also, let's look at the running costs for both cars. They're pretty low for the original car. Economy is not that bad. Drivability is really good, and that's like one of the things you want to be high as your first car. You want it to be relatively easy to drive, but with a 33.5 sportiness, it's a good base to build on. And then the tuned version has a 47.4 drivability, so by no means did the turbocharging ruin the drivability. It added some sportiness as well. It gave it some more acceleration. It didn't actually affect the fuel economy very much at all. And it didn't increase running cost very much either. So overall, it now costs 15,000, so that's right at the limit. But overall, some really solid and significant improvements for not that much added costs. Is there anything I don't like about this car and the way you tuned it? I'm trying to find something that I don't like. I mean, I shouldn't be out searching for something, because usually when you search for something in particular, you'll find it. But overall, I'm pretty content with this car. Overall, you did a really good job. Maybe the tires are a little bit wide, as I mentioned before, for the amount of power we're making, and also, I mean, the power distribution seems to be working, but also it's maybe a little bit unusual. Not to say that it's bad, just maybe not the most common thing to do. Alright, so we're gonna look at one more entry. That was the SGN model 18 by Slacks. And we are also gonna look at the base model 1995. Okay, trim 1 apparently is the old car, and then trim is the new car. Okay, this is by Musty Man Guy, and it is a 4-door saloon. Looks also a little bit more like an early 2000s car, aesthetically at least, but we'll see. Design. We got a 4-door 4-seat standard sedan, steel corrosion resistant steel monocoque and partial aluminum panels, so no full aluminum panels here like we had on the previous car. 5-gear single clutch manual gearbox seems to be pretty much the standard on most of these entries. Double wishbones front, semi-trailing arm rear is also a pretty classic setup, although the semi-trailing arm is maybe a little bit, getting a little bit old in 1995, but we'll see. If it works well, then it works well. 1200 kilograms is actually one of the heavier cars here, but still not that heavy overall. 151 horsepower from a 2.2 liter inline 6 and multi-point EFI again. So let's take a closer look at the engine. It has cast iron crank and conrods and hyper-eutectic cast, I don't know how you pronounce it, hyper-eutectic cast pistons. No VVL. Is it a dual overhead cam? It is. Has actually a pretty moderate cam profile, not very aggressive, 44. It's very much in the mid-range. 10.3 compression ratio, VVT on the intake cams but not on the exhaust cams. Multi-point EFI, no throttle per cylinders, no performance intake here. And 6400 RPM limit is, pretty much to be expected in 1995. Like, engines didn't used to rev as high as they can now, but actually, to be honest, with a lot of engines, and especially with the downsizing theme, because you have turbochargers, engines are generally revving a little bit less than they used to like 20 years ago. Compare like a BMW 320i. Today it has a 2-liter turbo engine makes its max power at 5600 RPM, revs to only 6000, I think, or maybe 6100, 6200. But the E36 generation 20 years back had a 2-liter inline 6 engine and rev to 6700, somewhere close to 7000, I think. Okay, so that was the engine. OpenDiff is certainly an interesting choice. So are the gear ratios, not spacing it in such a way that, you know, the second or third gear would reach 100 kilometers an hour. 205s is pretty much, yeah, it's really a decently like a decent size for a tire on this sort of car. Very realistic. Vent discs up front and rear, 3 pistons front, 2 pistons rear. Pretty big in size, honestly. Semi-clad under tray. 4 seats, standard interior, standard. Didn't I say you can't have an under tray? Standard cassette, standard safety, or did I just say you can't change anything on here if you want to have an under tray? But anyway, let's look at the. Let's see. This is the normal preset anyway. I recognize this, and let's see if this is any different. We had passive sway bars before, and this is different. So we may be looking at another disqualification here, unfortunately. Wait, I'll pause the recording for just a second and see for myself whether or not under trays are actually allowed. Alright, so I checked my own video where I specified the rules, and it said no under tray. So unfortunately, and the reason being is, obviously if you're gonna tune your car, you want to change the suspension as well, and an under tray would get into the way of that. I think that's almost literally what I said there. And this one does have an under tray. Not looking that good overall for as far as, you know, valid entries go now. I actually didn't even notice that the first time I looked at it. First time I checked it, man, that hurts, man. We didn't have very many entries to begin with, and then having almost half of them being disqualified for various reasons, it makes you think mostly about myself. Like, should I have not been so strict on my rules, on my rule set, or should I have maybe organized it differently and made a different presentation of the rules, rule guideline video, maybe with like a list where with like bullet points on the screen so everyone can see or something. That might have been a really good idea, actually, now that I think about it. Well, right, I'm sorry, but in that case, this one's unfortunately out too. So basically, as of right now, it's a duel between the SGN Model 18 and the AAG Scorpio. I'm gonna review one more here. It's the obviously Tonka truck by Donovan Chapman. which also looks very late 90s, early 2000s-esque, in my opinion. Yeah, especially on the rear end as well, with those Sylvia taillights and almost Aston Martin-like badge with the chrome stripes going from it. It looks good though. We got ourselves an all-wheel drive coupe, 5-speed gearbox from McPherson's up front, double wishbones rear, a 2.5 liter V6 with 174 horsepower, and still a pretty light car again. That is a beautiful power curve and power and torque curve. I gotta give you credit for that. That is really that is the sort of power and torque curve you want as your first car. It's very predictable. Obviously, in the mid-range, it's gonna, really get going, and then at the top range, it's nice and flat, so that you don't need to wind it out all the way to get the maximum power. Like if you're not experienced at shifting and you miss the shift point by 500 RPMs early, you're still pretty much getting the full power. So cast iron crank, I-beam steel conrods, forged pistons. 4D cam profile is nice and moderate. VVT on all cams this time. And we get a multi-point EFI, single configuration standard intake, and the fuel type is premium. 7,000 RPM rev limit is adequate, I think. We got a little bit of valve fault, but nothing to really worry about. And tubular headers, 2 reverse flow mufflers to make this thing pretty quiet. Also got dual exhausts. So we've seen that we have a 5-speed gearbox. 236 kilometers now is the way that it's geared. Viscous LSD with more power to the rear than to the front, as opposed to the SGN Model 18, I think it was, the other all-wheel drive car we've had in this video, that had the exact opposite power distribution. Then we get the hard long life road tires, which is interesting, but also makes sense for a normal car. Steel rims to keep the budget down, vented discs front and solid discs rear. No brake fit, probably because the rear brakes are bigger than the front ones. Let's see. Yep, okay. So no under tray here. That's good for once. That's actually helping with the validity of this entry. We got standard interior, basic cassette, standard safety, and all driver assists. And the cheapest options here as far as suspension goes, and the tuning is pretty much the normal preset, isn't it? Running costs are decently low, although they are the highest of the valid entries we've had so far. Still pretty low though. And economy is not beyond reason. It is, I think, also the highest fuel consumption we've seen so far. But the acceleration is the quickest. I'm pretty sure about that. At least as far as stock cars go. Okay, yeah, 15.4 seconds is really good as far as quarter mile times go. But now let's look at the tuned version. We got a big carbon wing on the rear. You got quad exhaust pipes. We got some vents on the bonnet to, signify, okay, it's me that's arriving. You know who I am. And the carbon lip up front is, or actually that's plastic. And let's see the differences on the engine, which there aren't any. Yeah, okay, there's a straight through muffler now and no first muffler, so it's gonna be louder. That's a start. That's something. The gearbox is still gonna be the same. Tires are still the same, although no, they're not. We now got medium compound road tires. We got 17-inch alloy rims now. The brake setup is still the same. This is all still the same, of course. And we now got gas monotube dampers, which are probably a lot easier to, replace yourself once if they break than, adaptive dampers. So there's a reasonable choice there. The suspension tuning has changed to give us a little bit more sportiness. Economy is still fine. Weight is now, of course, higher. This is now at 15,000 precisely without the 10% markup in the tuned form. And just to prove that the original car isn't too expensive, here it is, 14,960. So with that, how much has it actually improved? The acceleration time is worse because we gained quite a bit of weight. Economy is worse. Running costs are higher. Drivability is apparently also higher with the stock version. Let's see, 47.1, 26.9, 27.9, 19 and 41.2. Yeah, sportiness came up quite a bit. Comfort increased as well, so did prestige and safety. So overall, we did make some improvements, of course. Maybe not the most significant ones we've seen on the entry so far. But I mean, this is a sort of approach where you're like, okay, I'm 17 or 18 years old, I'm not gonna fiddle with the engine, right? And as far as everything else goes, I mean, sure, replacing the tires a little bit, making them wider, getting yourself some 17 alloy rims, swapping your twin tube dampers for some gas monotube ones, slightly making your car or making a car just a little bit more sporty on the suspension tuning, and lowering it. Yeah, okay, those are some pretty realistic mods. They're not that impactful though. And the running costs are higher now, and the economy is worse because the engine hasn't been retuned, and the car is now heavier just because of the game's calculations. Obviously, in real life, if you if a car is 20 years and 21 years old, in real life it usually doesn't get heavier in those 21 years. If anything, it gets just a little bit lighter if some smaller parts fall off or something, or some parts are rusted away, and it might actually become a little bit lighter over time. Yeah, so overall, a different approach here. It's up to you guys to decide whether you find that better or worse. I find it interesting, to say the very least, but we've seen some pretty interesting approaches as far as engine tuning or turbocharging normally naturally aspirated engine goes and whatnot. We've seen a couple of different approaches overall, and I'm not really sure yet which one I like best. So that sums it up for today. We have one more entry to review, and I'm gonna do that tomorrow. So hope you guys enjoyed this episode. Leave a like or a comment if you did. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.